Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Dana Being Dana. Our topic tonight is toxic relationships, and I am your host, Dana Michelle. I first would like to introduce my lovely panel. First, to my left, we have Quincy Payton.
Good evening.
And you can't do a toxic relationship show without bringing on your family.
Your toxic cousin.
So I brought my cousin. No, she's not toxic. I love her dearly. She's amazing. The lovely Miss Leah Thigpen.
Hey guys, looking for new cousins.
A familiar face, Ernest Tuckett, who is back to talk about toxic relationships.
Good evening, everybody.
And last but certainly not least, the esteemed, world-renowned Dr. Sandra Carlson. We call her Dr. Sandy, who's coming to bring us her expert opinion this evening.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
So before we get started, I want to just make a couple of announcements. Obviously, we've all been following in the news about all the hurricanes. I feel like there's a hurricane every show. So just our hearts go out and our thoughts are with all the people right now dealing with hurricanes, evacuations, power outages, etc. Quincy and I went to school together. He went to Morehouse and I went to Spelman, and a lot of our friends down in the Atlanta and Southeast region are without power. So we just wanted to send a special shout out to all of our friends and family who are out there without power or who are evacuated, etc. I next want to send a thank you to everybody for their support. There's a little button right now if you're watching us on the live feed. There's a little button to share, and we're going to be talking about toxic relationships. We're talking about mother-in-laws, father-in-laws, family members, friends, manipulative kids. My favorites are habitual line steppers and the husband and wife substitute, and we're going to get all into that. So if you know anybody who fits into any of those categories, if you know anybody who's got a toxic relationship, and if you have one of your own, please hit that share button, because we really want to, we're going to have fun tonight, but we really want to share helpful information for people, insightful information, and ways to manage these types of relationships. Never forget, Dana Being Dana is all about you living your best life and being your best you. And some of these relationships are obligatory, siblings, family, spouses perhaps, but there's ways that you can manage them and get them into be in their best shape, in their best format. So I just want to thank everybody who has been sharing. We appreciate the love. The last show that we had the largest numbers that we've had to date, which has been pretty awesome. And that comes from all of you out there sharing, liking, posting, etc. So I just want you to know that I appreciate it. Some people say that it's because of the video malfunction at the beginning of the show last week, but I disagree. I think we had fabulous guests. And once again, it has to do with you guys all sharing and supporting. So I appreciate the love, and I really thank you. I continue to have amazing guests, and these are all my people. These are friends. These aren't people that I've hired off the street, except for Leah. But
I'm a street person.
but everybody, these are my people. These are my friends. And so that's part of Dana Being Dana as well, which is bringing my people to the forefront, so you get to meet them and all that. And we thank Dr. Carlson and Carlson and Associates for being one of our sponsors tonight. We also have Seen Chicago sponsoring us this evening. So we just thank you all for your support. And if you're interested in sponsorship, you can reach me. I'll tell you how to do that later on tonight in the show. So we're going to dive right into toxic relationships. I did a little research this week on toxic relationships, and I wanted to talk about what is a toxic relationship and what that means. And the concept that I want to drive home is that all relationships are an exchange of energy. Each connection that we have either feeds us, builds us up, or it drains us. And the draining relationships are the ones we're talking about tonight. The draining relationships are the toxic ones. Toxic relationships are often characterized by a power struggle, excessive dependency, disappointment, and sometimes resentment. One of the first signs of a toxic relationship is when a partner is very controlling. And this doesn't always necessarily mean two adults. Toxic relationships can exist, like I said, outside of a love relationship. It can be parent-child, friend-friend, sibling-sibling, cousin-cousin. And it doesn't always have to be necessarily physically threatening or violent. Toxic relationships can often be characterized, or the ways in which people manipulate others in toxic relationships are out of fear, obligation, or guilt. Those are the main manipulators in toxic relationships. And I want to just go over 9 subtle signs that you are in a toxic relationship. And I just would like for the panel to react to those. Number 1, actually, I don't think there are 9, I think there's 8. You always feel like you're walking on eggshells. You're always fighting. Everything is so dramatic in your relationship all the time. Your partner wants you all to themselves. They want to cut you off from others. You keep score. Somebody in the relationship is keeping score. You or your partner stonewalls. What does stonewall mean? Stonewall means delay or blocking by refusing to answer questions, or they're giving evasive answers in conversation. So stonewalling is avoiding meaningful conversation, communication in a relationship. There's a constant power tug of war game between the two people. I talked about that power struggle earlier. Or you just feel like you didn't sign up for this. You didn't sign up for all of this drama when it comes to a toxic relationship. So what do you guys think about those signs?
I think the first one about walking on eggshells, it really just it relates to not being able to speak your mind and to express yourself in a particular relationship, and that feeling of stifling and holding stuff in, and then it often leads to bottling up and then explosions. So it kind of goes in both directions. You don't say anything, you try to keep the peace, but it can also then spill out in a bad way. But even when it doesn't spill out, it's just you're stifled. You're not your true, authentic self inside of that relationship, whatever type of relationship it is.
Well, for me, you're always fighting, and drama goes hand in hand. And I find like the older I get, the less drama I want in my life, and fighting like that. No one has time to devote that much energy to fighting or drama if you're trying to build a meaningful relationship, in my opinion. Like that is something that you can really do without. And if you are dealing with that more than building a genuine relationship, it's not worth your time or effort or cousinship.
Can you guys see the live feed? I'm getting reports that the feed isn't working. We need to restart it. Okay. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to get our live feed going so people can ask our esteemed expert questions. Thank you. are back with Dana being Dana. I am your host, Dana Michelle. You are watching on either IntellectualRadio.com, the website of the station, an iHeartRadio station, or you are watching on Facebook Live. I hope the feed is back up and running and everybody's good to go. We are talking tonight about toxic relationships, and we've just finished talking about ways in which you can spot and determine whether or not you are in a toxic relationship or you have one. We also talked about the fact that such toxic relationships don't necessarily have to be romantic. These toxic relationships can be with your children, of kids. I'm not saying that they're toxic, though. I love my babies. Go to sleep if y'all are awake. But, kids will manipulate you. People manipulate each other. And a lot of times when it becomes a detraction, when it's draining to you, that's when it is toxic. So, Dr. Sandy, I think I'm going to start with you. Can you guys see us on the live feed? Are we good? If you can see us, share us. That'd be amazing. Great. Awesome. All right. Dr. Sandy, we're going to start with you because I know you have seen it all.
I've seen a lot.
You have seen a lot. Can you tell us an example of a toxic relationship?
Yeah, I thought I'd use one from my own life.
Okay.
When I was newly married and newly pregnant, we were going to visit my mother-in-law who summered at a cabin they owned in Brainerd, Minnesota. And the pregnancy involved a lot of morning sickness.
Wow.
And about an hour away from Brainerd, my husband said, "Oh, by the way, there is no plumbing at the cabin." Lovely. So we get there, and there is only an outhouse. And I was throwing up a lot, and I refused to throw up in an outhouse. Maybe that was obnoxious of me, but I'm not going to do that. So instead, I would just go lay on the dock and throw up in the lake. And after about a few hours of this, my husband came out to the dock and said, "My mother doesn't want you to throw up in the lake because you're scaring away the fish. Please throw up in the outhouse."
Nice.
And our relationship went downhill from there with my mother-in-law. She's dead now, so I feel free to talk about this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What lake is this again?
Long Lake in Minnesota, South Long Lake.
The Lake of Minnetonka.
Yeah.
Bathing
I
in the
thought I was
lakes of
feeding the
Minnetonka.
fish, and she's like, "I'm scaring them away." So
Yes.
yeah, she resented that I had married her son. He was her golden boy, and she was very unhappy that we were married. And she finally accepted me after about 25 years. So it was 25 hard years, though.
Wow.
I've heard stories about the husband substitute when it comes to only children who are boys, the only sons. This is not a dig at you, but that can also be really hard. Stories, this is not about Quincy, but stories that I've experienced personally in my own dating relationships. I dated somebody whose mother would call my house on the weekends looking for him. She insisted that we call her when we took vacations because she wanted to talk to him every single day. And I said, the whole purpose of our trip is a vacation from everybody and all their problems. I believe in taking vacations and escaping everybody else's needs and issues and all that and just enjoying time with who you're with. We had gone to, I'm not making this stuff up. She, when he moved out of his mother's house, she needed counseling to cope with him moving out. And that should have been a huge red flag for me. But I was like, oh, that's so normal. They just love each other. But there were times where, she was violent tempered too, in reaction to our relationship, throwing food up against a wall, real crazy stuff. So the signs are pretty clear. I think sometimes when you're in those situations, you don't always recognize them and see them for what they are, which is toxic. Ernest, would you like to talk about toxic relationships, toxic examples?
Stalker. I don't know how much more toxic you get than that. Somebody who doesn't understand when somebody doesn't want you in their life to move on. It was someone I dated before I got married. I'm divorced now, but before I got married, we had broken up. I'm just doing a timeline to show you how nuts it was. 6 months before I even met my ex-wife, who I dated for a year and then married. 6 months into that marriage, so we're talking 2 years from the breakup of the stalker, in quotes. She wasn't violent, thank God. I started getting calls and texts, and her tagline was, her thing to me was, "Why did you disobey the will of God for your life?" Suggesting that she, can I say, her crazy butt was somehow God's will for my life. And I was about to be an atheist at that point, if that was really God's will. But anyway, so it was people who just don't understand. People who feel entitled to a place in someone's life. People who are emotionally unable to let go and deal with rejection, deal with things of that nature. It just, the signs came out slowly, but I started to see the issues. Then I pulled away, and then in pulling away, I learned that this wasn't going to be an easy tie to break in her head anyway. And so, of course, it caused problems in my marriage at the time for a minute, until I was able to show that it was clearly something from way back and nothing current. So I had to deal with that. So it was a bad situation. So sometimes you'll see those people who are possessive and can't let go, can't distinguish reality from their own crazy mindset. You need to pay attention to that in the beginning.
Is that her outside the studio right now?
Shut the lights.
Turn off the lights. Okay. Leah, would you like to give us an example of toxic relationships?
Oh, sure. I have several. How many minutes do we have?
We got plenty of time.
Oh, beautiful.
Let's start from 1998.
Seriously?
You can tell the story.
Oh, wonderful. So Dana and I are like blood cousins, like for real, not play cousins, not, oh, I love her, she's my girl. Like, we like cousins. We like can share kidneys. And so summer 98, woo, is an excellent summer. Kicked it a lot. And so Dana's my big cousin. So I felt like super cool because I'm hanging out with my big cousin. I get to go to places I can't go because, she can get in anywhere. Great. So she had a ton of friends, and she was dating someone at the time, and super cool guy. Let me say that. But we were all friends, mutual friends. He had a habitual line stepper.
The original,
way before Charlie Murphy.
Did he have a jerry curl?
She should have.
I'm sorry.
She should have. But we did want to say, what did the five fingers say to the face? And so this particular girl, like, who, God love her, I hope she's matured by now, but she was very jealous of Dana and her relationship with this guy. And she played the role of, I'm his little sister, so everything's innocent. Like, right. It's nothing going on, but she wanted to put Dana, I remember specifically, we were at a party and we were getting ready to leave to go somewhere else. Yeah. And she wanted Dana to get in the back seat of the car.
Yeah.
And Dana's boyfriend was driving. Like, who does that?
I remember, because I was the last one to come out of the house.
Yes.
I don't know whatever. But I didn't pay. Everybody was like, get in the car, get over here, come over here. Because they all knew, like, if I had known.
Yes. But she immediately jumped in the front seat and was like, she can ride, right? She can ride in the back.
But it's a classic case of a habitual line stepper.
Absolutely.
And it's about feelings and emotions that are misplaced and not affording the proper amount of respect to the relationship, right? And it's not just that example, but it's just, if people feel threatened when there are new people onto the scene, whether it be a relationship, a marriage, what have you, people feel threatened. So that's one example of that. Quincy?
Well, my example is a sad example, and I actually think it happens way too often, and that's where you have two friends, people who grew up together, people who knew each other when they were very young and came of age together. was very close, maybe went to high school, best of friends. And as they get into adulthood, you see a separation from them. But the separation is based off maybe one person is moving forward in their careers. Maybe one person is moving forward in their marriage or in a relationship, having a child, growing a family, and the other person is kind of left behind and begins to resent the person who has gone forward. And I say that it's sad because you might have had a lot of years built up in that friendship. And now, because of resentment, because of jealousy, because of I don't like the fact that this is making me feel inadequate, that my friend has advanced and moved on in life. I don't like her anymore. I don't like him anymore. I resent him.
Yeah.
And that begins to manifest in all kinds of ways. And the toxicity in that relationship begins to destroy that relationship. I see it all the time. It's just so sad because if you know people like that, that grew up together that way, and then to see them grow apart as adults, that's tough.
Yeah.
Lee, do you want to talk about coworkers?
Yes, don't trust them. No.
Be an entrepreneur, work for yourself.
Touche. Kidding, Dr. Sandy. I'm sure we can trust people. But just in coworkers, you really, especially in corporate America, you really have to be careful who you trust, who you build a relationship with, because it is a cutthroat environment and everybody's trying to climb to the top. And the people you think are your friends could be the ones who use things that you've shared with them or use weaknesses for their strengths
Against you.
To push you under the bus and progress. And that's very toxic because we spend a lot of time at work. Like a large majority of your time is at work.
Yep.
You know, and so to be in that environment with people that are every day trying to sabotage you can really drain you, like on a daily basis.
That's true.
You can be sad and depressed. Dr. Sandy, I don't know how we deal with that. I'm open to suggestions, but aside from slapping coworkers, but thank you, Dr. Sandy. But yeah, so that's just on a general level. I can go into stories.
Yeah,
that's general.
Well, I want to talk about kids. I have kids. And they can be very manipulative. I was at an event a couple days ago, last weekend, where I saw there was a little girl who was screaming, and she wasn't upset. She was just loud. And then when I listened, she was bossing her parents around, and it was a very interesting dynamic to watch. But it made me think about. I'm not necessarily saying the relationship is toxic, but I think that kids can be very draining in some of their manipulative ways. And I think that doesn't go away. I'm divorced. And so when it comes to my time and my attention, for a while, my kids had my full attention. And then as I move on, when I go on dates or when I am out and about and I'm not necessarily focused on them, they do things to get my attention. And I see that in people that I date and their children. You know, everybody responds to a new relationship or a new situation. And sometimes vying for attention is a way to manipulate. Not necessarily saying the relationship is toxic, but I think that that's what people do, you know, to pull at the emotional heartstrings of the parents. And I watched that in full view last week. But I think it's something that happens often. Anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I'll comment. I have a lot of sympathy for parents who are dealing with kids who are extremely manipulative, especially parents who already are short on time and have all these other things pulling them in all these different directions. I fall short of calling that particularly a toxic relationship in large part because kids are going to be kids. And parents must rise to the occasion and become parents. However, what I will say is that I see toxicity in relationships between parents and children when the children are older. when the children are adults. And if we're talking especially about a sick parent or a parent who may be in their last year of life, that's where I really see the ugly side of being a parent and trying to negotiate with not negotiate with your kids, but negotiating the relationship where how is me going into the next phase going to impact my children, and how does that manifest in what I give to them on my way out?
Right.
And I've seen the manipulation of that too many times in my own family and in other families. And that type of toxicity is extremely poisonous, especially so because it's just ugly. It's ugly to look at. It's ugly to watch. And to me, that's really where I feel toxicity with kids.
Anybody else?
Specifically about kids you're talking about, or just?
Well, I was asking about kids, but if nothing about kids, I want to talk about my favorite, the habitual line steppers and the husband-wife substitute. Because I think when you move into adulthood, particularly if you're single, that is what permeates these 30s, these 40s, these young 50s, because people develop friendships. You're single, you're chilling, you're a nice girl, you're a nice guy, you're cool, and you form these friendships and these bonds with people, which is great. Everybody's having a good time until somebody wants a relationship with somebody else. And sometimes those relationships that are great when everybody's single and cool can become toxic when people get into relationships, because you never know, and I always tell people this, you never know what other people's agendas are. Right? So you may just be a cool friend. You may just be wanting to help them out. You just may consider yourself a nice girl, a nice guy, but people have other motives in store. And so when they see you choosing someone else, we can go back to 1998. When they see you choosing someone else, you may think all along that somebody just wants to be a friend, that somebody just wants to be cool, but they've had plans for you and they've been setting up this stage, for more. And so that's when the relationship can become toxic. When people try to sabotage relationships, when people try to sabotage marriages and they are exterior to those relationships, those become toxic.
Yeah.
And I see that happen often.
Yeah, I've seen that. I mean, it happens whether it's a person on the outside looking for a romance with one of the couple, or sometimes a family member or friends who don't particularly like the spouse, or the mom. Somebody mentioned earlier the mother who feels like the child's getting taken away, or the father even. I think the first thing that happens is when you're taking someone, especially in a spousal situation, you got to first take some time to establish what's the impact on your future or your spouse with any of your external relationships, because they've got to become secondary to a certain degree. Obviously, you have children; that's a whole nother separate column. I'll stick children over here because they can't be secondary, but when they're minors. But I'm talking about other adults, and it doesn't mean you have to cut them off. In fact, it may be unhealthy in many ways to cut them off. I just think you have to start by saying what's the impact, and then as the person in the relationship, you need to manage that impact. If a situation makes them jealous, engage in certain conversations to try to resolve it. But don't make it the other person's responsibility. I think it's your two relationships. You figure out how to manage that yourself. So, for example, I have a couple of best friends who were female, and when I got married, that was one of the first things I talked about when I was dating my wife. And then as we moved towards marriage and got married, there was a level of respect in how they were introduced into our interactions. I didn't have conversations with them where she didn't know I was having those conversations. And they certainly weren't coming into our space in a way with any sense of entitlement.
Right.
Because I tend to, whenever my friends get married, male or female, I always give them space. And I let them invite me into their life in the way that it's going to work now. Even my guy friends, I give them the space they need, and I allow them the freedom to tell me our relationship has to change because this is the priority. And I think if you have friends who have that mindset, then you should be good. When your friends don't have that mindset, frankly, they need to be checked.
Because they're what? Habitually
stepping over the line. And they may have to get kicked in the chest, like Charlie Murphy.
Like Charlie Murphy.
No, don't kick anybody. That was a joke.
We don't promote violence on
No,
Dana
no
Being
violence.
Dana.
Unless his name is Rick James.
Charlie Murphy. No, I think that's well said, and I think that's true. I think, and that's what a lot of it is responding to change and affording the respect that the relationship essentially deserves. And I think that that's important. One of the terms that came to mind when I was preparing for this show was codependency. And the definition of codependency is, one of them is excessive emotional or psychological reliance on a partner, often when there is an illness. So sometimes there's mental illness or a physical illness. Oftentimes it's associated with addiction. Is codependency toxic in and of itself?
Yes. And let me explain why. The concept of codependency does come out of addictions, comes out of working with alcoholic families. And in the classic sense of the word, the codependent is also dependent on the substance. Let's use alcohol, for example. So while the alcoholic is pursuing the alcohol, the codependent is trying to manage the alcoholic, right? And what then happens to the children is there's no one there for them. Codependency, I think the simplest way I define it is when people consistently help others to the point of truly hurting themselves. I don't mean inconvenience, I mean hurting yourself. I had one client who husband was an alcoholic, and she just couldn't bear the thought of wasting his whiskey, so she drank it all. She drank a whole bottle of whiskey. Was not a drinker herself. This was the first time she'd ever done that. She was home with a 5-year-old child and got very, very drunk. And the reason she did that was she didn't want him to drink the whiskey.
Wow.
So her way of trying to control the situation was she drank it, right? She grew up in Depression era, so she wasn't willing to just dump it down the drain. Me, I would have thrown it down the drain. But you see people in those kinds of relationships all the time. They go out and they say, well, I'll buy the beer, so I'll only buy a 6-pack at a time for her, so she doesn't drink a case. And oftentimes then the alcoholic has it hidden around the house anyhow. But it's when you're always, doing stuff that's hurting you. That's not healthy.
Right. Right. And obviously, toxic relationships need to be managed. If you all have a question out there, we're following along on Facebook Live. If you have a question for the panel, particularly Dr. Sandy, our resident, well-renowned expert, please please hit us up in the comments. But we're going to keep talking about how to manage these toxic relationships. One of the things that comes to mind for me is boundaries. I think a lot of times, particularly with kids, boundaries need to be set, and people need to understand boundaries. A lot of times, I think in toxic relationships, or when things become toxic, is when people feel threatened. So one way to deal with the toxicity of relationships is reassurance, letting children know that, mommy and daddy still love you, even though we've got this new person in our lives. And that can be from babies to grown children who need to have that message socialized, that just because your parent is moved on and is in a different relationship besides your biological parents, that still doesn't mean that there's no love for you, and that they love you just the same. So I think setting those boundaries and talking and reassurance can be helpful in setting proper boundaries with toxic relationships. Dr. Sandy, did you want to make another point with respect to how to manage those relationships?
Sure. Boundaries are, I like to think of them like our skin, all right? Our skin keeps the bad things out, like the bacteria and the viruses and the mosquitoes, and it keeps the good things in, like our liver and our lungs, because it'd be like a mess if you walked around without skin and your liver was dragging on the, it would be awful. You'd be a mess, right, if you didn't have skin. And our boundaries are emotional skin, and so it keeps the bad stuff out, the hurtful things that people might do. It's about not taking those things personally. That's a boundary. I'm not taking your bad behavior towards me to mean something about me. But it also means that I choose who I give my love, my devotion to, who I'm loyal to. I just don't spill that out over to everybody, and especially people who don't deserve it, because not everyone deserves our love and our loyalty.
I heard some counselors describe boundaries almost like a lot of people think of boundaries. You're going to put up walls, and he says boundaries aren't walls. Boundaries are a gate with a fence. I'm sorry, a fence with a gate, and you open the gate to let in what you want in, and then you shut the gate to keep out what you don't want in.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I thought about with boundaries was letting your no be no, and being true to yourself. When your no is when you have a no, be a no. And with family in particular, especially family in dire need, like I've had it over the course of my life, and I had an issue. My codependency was I was so reliant on approval that people asking me for something, especially people that I love, and was fearful of their well-being being in jeopardy, like my family members, and then they would sometimes get an attitude and get angry. Then that messed with my self-esteem issue of needing their approval. I was a yes when I was a solid no in my heart.
Right.
And over the years, that bitterness just built up so bad that 10 to 12 more years into it, after my mother passed away, and this was a constant thing, I was so angry at them. And then I had to accept the fact that I had made these choices. And I was really angry at myself for being a yes when I was a solid no. And there would be plenty of times I was a yes, but there was a whole lot I was a no, and I was still saying yes. And that boundary for me was to allow my no to be no when it was time for it to be a no. Being true to myself, taking care of myself, and not hurting myself because I was so intent on making everybody else happy with me.
And Dana, to speak on boundaries, in addition to all of that, what I found, like after I got married, is not only do you have to set boundaries for yourself, but there can be, for me personally, a level of insecurity if I don't see those boundaries being set in front of me. So like if after I got married, I mean, my husband's a popular guy, had a lot of female friends, and some of them were real habitual line steppers, like asking me to freshen up their drinks in my house. Like
that's like Cab Calloway line stepping.
Right. But it wasn't like a hostess kind of thing. It was garçon. More vino over here. Like
that is line jumping.
Exactly. But literally, I'm not even making this up. Like literally, this one woman was like, here. She didn't even look at me. Like, really?
That is Cab Calloway.
And the kids
Savion Glover.
Exactly. Oh, she put on taps. She was playing taps. She stole the line. All of it. But for me, after that, I was kind of like, hold on. I felt a little insecure in how my husband was going to handle that situation. Exactly. But when I saw the boundary being set, when I saw it gave me reassurance.
Right. Yes.
What you were saying, because people could set boundaries for themselves and boundaries that I want. But if I don't know they're being implemented, if I can't actually see it happening, that plays to my insecure, or just, me personally, I don't know if calling it insecure is, the right thing, but whatever that feeling is, me seeing it helped me to be okay.
Is there something to that, having the manifestation of the boundaries actually being established in ways that all parties are aware of and we're all on the same page and seeing those being set?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, what you're saying too is having those boundaries supported. So, that your husband supported you in that and said, no, it's not how we roll here.
Right.
Get your own vino.
Yeah.
Anime.
Right over there. Help yourself. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. One of the things you had talked about, Dr. Sandy, when we prepared for this panel, was just about the loving, caring person with respect to boundaries. I thought that was an excellent point, and I think this is important for other people to hear. So can you repeat that point, which I think is great. And one of the comments that was in here was about, well, I'll ask that question later. Go ahead.
I think so often we're afraid to hurt other people. And so we're reluctant to set boundaries, and we're reluctant to say no because I don't want to hurt that person. What I have found with people who are toxic for us, they're not sensitive, caring people. And we're so afraid of hurting someone's feelings whose feelings don't get hurt very easily. Right? And so we're subtle and we're careful, and we just don't want to cause any problems, and they don't care.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important to understand that if you're not intentionally hurting someone, we're not responsible for other people's feelings. We're responsible for our own.
Right.
Right? And if I say no to someone and they want to get offended by that, well, that's on them. That is not my fault. If I can't do something, I think the other thing to remember about boundaries too is when you talk about energy, we are not limitless sources of energy.
Yeah.
And some people just want to suck you dry.
Say that. Say that.
Dr. Sandy, amen.
Yeah.
Say that.
Leave you with nothing.
I think that's true. And a lot of times what I've learned is when we joke about habitual line steppers as a joke, but I think that they often, what I've noticed is that the same people who habitually line step absolutely do not want the same behavior to befall on them. They don't want people to, a lot of times they sabotage relationships because they don't have them of their own. They sabotage marriages. They sabotage interactions with people because they don't have them of their own. And when they do have those relationships, they become incredibly protective of the relationships and forbid the exact same type of behavior that they infiltrate with other people. And I think that's a very important point to recognize, because they don't really care as much unless it's them.
Right.
Is there forgiveness when it comes to toxic relationships? And or when should you cut someone off? One of the comments that was in here was that toxic relationships don't get any better.
No.
Sure.
Can I talk about forgiveness?
Yeah, please.
In my work, I like to sort of blend the psychological and the spiritual.
Amen.
And I think we have a big misunderstanding about forgiveness.
Yep.
That forgive and forget, or what I call the Hallmark sentimentality forgiveness. Oh, it's okay. We'll just let it go this time. That's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness in Hebrew literally means to forgo revenge. Right? And so I'm giving up my right to retaliate. It is not absolution for what they've done, because only God can absolve us of our sins. It does not mean I'm going to be in a relationship with you. Right? It does not mean, well, it's all okay. None of that. Forgiveness means I'm letting go. Yeah. And what happens is the person who gets the freedom is the forgiver, not the forgiven. Because when I'm trying to get revenge, I stay hooked into that other person's garbage. But when I let go, then I'm free. And so forgiveness is just a really freeing experience. But it is not saying that abuse is okay, because it's never okay.
Can I throw one thing in there?
Absolutely.
I wrote down in the outline almost a little phrase that's almost like what Dr. Sandy said, which is forgiveness does not equal reconciliation.
Right.
Forgiving someone, because I've had people say that to me. You haven't forgiven that person. I said, I forgive him. Well, you walk by him and don't say. I actually said hi and just keep walking.
Yeah.
I said nobody has the right to nobody has the right to be my friend. I've forgiven him by not punching him in the face because of what he did to me, giving up my right to revenge. But it doesn't mean that our relationship is going to be the same as it was before.
Right.
And reconciliation is not something that you owe, because there's a lot of people I know who, especially, and I grew up in church and I've always been in church ministry and all that stuff. We think that unless we're back to where we were, we haven't forgiven. And a lot of people stay in abusive relationships and condone it in their mind that God is telling them to, because they think forgiveness means I got to go back in.
Right.
Somebody robs your house who you invited over as a guest. You may forgive them, but they're not coming back in your house.
Right.
Because there's a level of trust that they have to establish to have a right to be inside the gate, the boundary that you set. So forgiveness and reconciliation, that was a freeing moment for me about 20 years ago when I got that. It's just not the same thing. And sometimes you can move on and still be seen as and still actually be forgiving a person.
I think there's another thing coming out of religion is turn the other cheek. And people take that to mean that Jesus just wants us to keep getting slapped around. Yeah? And then what I learned about that, what that meant was in Jesus's day, when a person went to hit a slave, they would backhand them because they didn't believe the slave was worthy of being hit with the palm of their hand. So if you turn the other cheek, they're forced to hit you with the palm of their hand. In other words, they're forced to hit you as though you're their equal, which is a whole different thing than getting punched over and over and over again.
One question, and there's a couple questions that I want to address that have come up in the feed, is can you forgive without confrontation? Sometimes you have to cut ties and release. There's no need for dialogue. And I think that's what Dr. Ernest was talking about earlier. Is just letting go. You don't have to necessarily dialogue about it. There's no chit chat. There's no discussion. It's just what you've done is so egregious. We don't even need to talk about it. I can forgive you, but it's done. It's over.
I work with people all the time who've been abused as children, and they forgive dead parents. Right? Yeah, the person doesn't need to be there. They don't need to even know. And I think in horrifically toxic relationships, it's dangerous to have that conversation because they're just going to turn it back on you.
Right. Mm-hmm. One favorite topic that came up in the marketing for this show was in-laws. And one of the questions that have come up in the feed is with in-laws and setting boundaries. Should it be the biological person or should it be the other person with respect to setting in-laws? What do you guys think about that when it comes to boundaries?
Well, it's interesting you say that because I think for me, and I don't know, I always have to defer to Dr. Sandy, but I think it might depend on your in-law and who they are and how they operate. Because for me personally, and I love my mother-in-law, let me say that, I do. But not to say that there haven't been bumps in the road, you know what I'm saying? But I know for her, hearing it from her son
resonates.
Exactly. And not that it wouldn't resonate from me, but if he goes in first as a cushion or a buffer, when I come to the table, it's a much better discussion than if it's me coming. I could probably say the exact same thing, but it could, perception is everything, appear more confrontational. Right. You know, a whole gamut of things could go on if I'm the first one in the door. Or
that there are ulterior motives. And I think that people respect when it's not just my angry girlfriend or my angry wife or whomever. We are saying this as a team.
Exactly.
We mean this. Exactly. You need to respect this.
Exactly.
And this is us as a team.
Exactly.
So I do think there should be a responsibility for the biological relation to make sure that everybody in the family gets information, so to speak. They've known these people all their lives. They understand the dynamics and why people are responding the way they are. Jealousy, feeling threatened, afraid of the relationship changing, etc. And they can address those and provide the reassurance that's necessary to bring people back to a positive equilibrium.
I used to do premarital counseling several years ago. And one of the first things I would do with my couples were there was a detachment from your parents. And it's not just symbolic. It was something that there was a process that had to be done. And how well they did it really set the stage for in-laws really knowing how to communicate and interact with this new married couple that just so happens to be their son and their daughter. Setting the tone early, talking to your parents, and making sure that you are the owners of this marriage. You dictate how this marriage will go. You dictate the rules of this marriage. And making sure that is conveyed in a loving way, in a respectful way, but in an assertive way where the parents understand, okay, they're on their own. Where this gets manipulated sometimes is when the couple is still financially dependent on their parents.
Right.
And sometimes that finance part gets used to manipulate and get gets back into the couple where they can dictate decisions. Very important process, though. I encourage all new married couples to really, really take that serious and detach.
I'm probably the only mother-in-law sitting here. So I think also as a parent of adult children, you have a responsibility to say to your kids, I'm going to respect your boundaries.
Mhm.
And if I step on them, I want you to tell me.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? I've never been a mother-in-law before. I need, if I hurt you, if I do something, I really want you to let me know. And, it's setting an example to say, I respect this marriage. I want this marriage to succeed.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But it also says I might have to set some boundaries sometimes
Right.
too.
And that's a good point, because a lot of times people want, you want your sister or your dad or your cousin to be happy and married and in love and all those other things, right? But when faced with a relationship with healthy boundaries, not everybody understands or fully demonstrates what that means. Put your money where your mouth is, right? You want mommy to be happy, right? If that's the case, then part of that means adjusting some behaviors to respect the boundaries of this relationship. You can't dive all into mommy's time and mommy's space, or daddy's time and daddy's space, and you really want daddy to truly be happy. If you really want people to end up in relationships and situations that are good for them, part of that means adjusting some of your behavior and respecting the place of the people who are in those positions. So any closing or final remarks from you guys?
I have one.
Please. We got a lot of doctors too. Dr. Quincy, Dr. Ernest, Dr. Sandy.
Dr. Feelgood.
I'd like to define a functional relationship, because we're pretty good at defining dysfunctional or
Yes.
toxic. Well, I like to define it as a functional relationship. Healthy relationship is one in which each person in the relationship or each person in the family is encouraged to reach their full potential.
Mhm.
If someone's not encouraging you and helping you to grow and develop to the person God wants you to be, then there's a problem. And I think then you got to look at, is this toxic?
Yeah. Are the people in your lives helping you reach your full potential?
My parting comment would be recognizing that we all can be the conduit for the toxicity if we're not careful. Check your sense of entitlement. Check it, measure it, determine it in every relationship. How entitled am I in this relationship? Because nobody owes you anything. It's up to us to each take care of ourselves. And anything you're getting from someone else is a gift.
Yeah.
And you have to treat it as such. And that's when you check your sense of entitlement. You can do exactly what Dr. Sandy said is, I'm here for something, sure.
Yeah.
But I'm also here for what you're here for. And it's a give and take relationship. Right. But that sense of entitlement is really what has really hindered a lot of my family and other relationships, because it doesn't set well, because then they give you, people you're helping give you an attitude, and it doesn't go together.
Yeah.
In closing, get new cousins. That's all.
I got to reevaluate my panels.
Family.
That is all.
Woo, toxic. Part 2 coming soon. Dr. Payton.
I just would say our parents from time to time may tell us something that we disagree with, and that might just be flat out wrong. Our siblings may do that. Our friends certainly do that from time to time. There is one person that has never lied to you and has never said anything negative to you or has never been even wrong. And that is the little voice that talks to you. That voice that tells you, you know what, this does not feel right. That voice has never lied to you. If you are trying to judge if you're in a toxic relationship or not, or something, should you do something, should you get out of something, listen to that voice. I think you'll be all right.
Well, I think there has been a ton of great information tonight. I want to thank my esteemed panel guests and my cousin Leah for coming out tonight. I'm just kidding. I love Leah. She is amazing. Thank you all so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I think that we talked about things that people use, manipulators in toxic relationships: fear, obligation, and guilt. And I think real love doesn't use any of those things to influence you, whether it be romantic or family or friends or otherwise. Real love helps you become your full potential and supports you in your quest. Thank you all for being my friends and for showing me real, genuine love. I appreciate you guys all being here. Thank you to our sponsors, Carlson and Associates, which is Dr. Sandy, Scene Chicago. Dr. Sandy, how can people reach you? Because I think you're going to have a ton of people clamoring and knocking down your door.
Area. But phone number would be 630-771. Now I forgot my phone number.
Save your time to
Call
forget
Dana,
your phone
she'll get
number.
the
You
number.
can, I can connect you to all of these doctors because there's great information. Dr. Sandy, I love you. You are awesome and amazing. So I can connect you with all of these fabulous people. They're all truly, really great, and they have great information and insight to share. If you are interested in sponsorship, please visit the website, danabeingdana.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram, and I can give you information for sponsoring. We thank our sponsors this evening. Next week, we are talking about Girls Trip. It's the #1 comedy this year, actually. And Dana Being Dana has got a girls trip of her own. So stay tuned for next week. We're going to have a great time. Thanks again to my panel. I hope that you guys found this information helpful. Please share it with people who you think can benefit from this information. I think a lot of great stuff was said here tonight. So please share. Thank you all. See you next week.